Pathways of the Heart by LaTendre, read by LaTendre. Chapter 8, Miraculous Moment. I am so excited that you've continued listening. Everything I have said in previous pages has been a prelude to the exciting events that follow. You may recall in Chapter 5, I described my birth experience. Everything in my life changed forever, November 13th. Because that date is my birthday, I have this date and its events secured in my mind as one of the most miraculous nights of my entire life. The weekend of my birthday, I visited my sister and celebrated my birthday. And I cannot remember where she lived, what car she drove. All my focus is encapsulated in a matter of 3 to 4 minutes that night. I can still hear Bishop Howard Swansea's voice as I sat in church that evening. I heard his voice floating towards me. It crept into my mind like a fog and became clear as he said, I don't know who I'm talking to, but tonight, November 13th, can be the first day of the rest of your life. I thought to myself, I want that to be true for me. Suddenly, I was raising my right arm toward heaven in faith to God. I felt a single tear falling from my left eye. I heard a commotion to my left. I heard my sister exclaim, You're healed, you're healed. My sister was dancing up and down the pew aisle saying, you're healed, repeatedly. As I watched her, I remember thinking, I don't know what that's all about, but okay. I wouldn't come to understand the amazing miracle that began in that moment of faith until a long while later. As the events of my life evolved, I would gain more understanding. I didn't know that in the moments and years before I had raised my hand in faith, I had been oblivious and unresponsive to Christ Jesus' love or truth. A moment before that miraculous moment, I was utterly void of sense and sensibility. Before that amazing moment, I had lived for years deeply saddened and without hope. In that moment, I didn't know what happened, but I knew something happened and everything had changed. I woke the next day, and today I don't recall how I lived or what choices I made. I'm only sure I had begun to live a new life. I began with baby steps to discover my new self. I began to test what I liked. I made choices about everything. Finding favorite colors, textures, and tastes was my life's adventure. During this experimental phase of my life, I had an in-depth conversation with my therapist. I plumbed my life to know myself. I began to recognize I could not remember my son and daughter as young children. I frequently found myself feeling baffled that I was ignorant of their history and mine. I felt like I was meeting them for the first time. For a few years, I felt like I hadn't tried hard enough to remember them. I kept thinking that if I just kept trying, somehow their pasts and mine would resurface. Now, during this time, my son was 20 and my daughter was 18 years old. I began to understand that I couldn't just start bossing them around or expecting that they would do whatever I said. I didn't really know who they were. They had lived with me as one kind of woman, one kind of mother. Suddenly, I had become an entirely different woman. They were justifiably suspicious and uncertain. As the first year of my rebirth approached, I remember my daughter looking at me with a full face of consternation as she explained, I want my old mother back, my other mother back. To which I exasperatedly replied, I can't get her back for you, but I'm here. She flatly answered, Well, I hope I like you. I frankly said, I hope I like me too. I had no idea who I was, who I wasn't, or who I was becoming. Everything about me and the world around me was a mystery to me. I was living in a precarious and uncertain maze of questions and answers. I didn't have any gauge to know what I was becoming or how long until I was myself. The few things I was sure of were 1, I loved Jesus. 2, I loved my family. I had changed so drastically that all of my associations and long-standing friendships were pressed to their limit. I was completely dependent upon Jesus to teach me to distinguish between my imagination and my spiritual insight. I was dependent upon my family to reteach me things like social etiquette and interpersonal interactions. I was ignorant of social graces. I had to learn how to manage myself in private and public settings. I began to suspect I had some extreme memory loss one year when I made banana bread for the first time. I found a recipe on YouTube and I was excited to try it. I meticulously followed the recipe and every step the chef instructed. I made sure my ingredients were precisely measured to achieve the expected results. As I retrieved my banana bread loaf out of the oven, I felt pride in my achievement and great relief. In my zeal, I wanted to share my excitement, so I called my daughter to express my joy. I said, "Guess what I did today?" She waited. Then I said, "I made banana bread today." She paused longer than I expected and said cautiously, "Mom," with a sigh and slight inflection, "you always make great banana bread." I said, "What?" She repeated, "We love your banana bread." After a few more volleys of my surprise and her reiterations, I said, "I'll call you back." I immediately called my son and I had the same conversation. I said, "Guess what I did today?" He asked, "What?" Then I answered, "I made banana bread today." He said, "Mom, you make great banana bread." I was curious and concerned about after hanging up the phone with him a few minutes later. I called my daughter again and asked, "Do I speak another language? Do I know Kung Fu? Can I fly a plane?" I had so many questions about myself, and it seemed that my family had many answers. I found I would learn more about myself as the years progressed. I also discovered that there were some details about my past that would be left in the past forever. One night, I was at the dining room table having a discussion with my family when they began to discuss some events in my past. As they spoke, I watched their mouths and tried to remember the history they were telling. They agreed together about the events, but I was standing on the outside, like eavesdropping or walking into a room just in time to hear the punchline. I was in the caboose and too late to know what was just before. I couldn't prove my ignorance or gauge my knowledge. I just heard them and wondered if or when I would remember. On another occasion, I had an encounter with a family friend. We sat together in the living room, and the woman asked, "Where's that other sister of you all?" Everyone present asked, "What sister?" She began to describe the woman. "You know, that other sister." Then suddenly I knew she meant me. I said, "Oh, that was me." She said firmly, "Oh, no, not you. I like you. No, where's the other sister of you all's?" I walked over to where she sat. I gently touched her shoulder with the palm of my hand. As I looked in her eyes, I said, "That was me." She said, "No." I said again, "That was me. I know I don't look the same and I don't act the same, but that was me." As I am writing this tonight, I am still amazed that events like that continued to happen for years. I am no longer shocked. I sigh with acceptance, knowing that if I needed a memory, Jesus would allow me to find it. If it has vanished, it is like an errant sock lost in the laundry after it's done. I especially remember an evening in 2011, just a few days after Valentine's Day. I was with a group of women talking about various types of life issues, topics women find interesting and informative. This particular night, I met someone whose story would prove significant in my life. At some point in the evening, the group discussion began to be about romantic relationships and personal resilience. The woman sitting in front of me began discussing her husband of 20 plus years. She said, "I don't know why I'm saying this, but I had an event happen in my brain several years ago. The doctors treated me for something called retrograde amnesia. I lost so many memories." I began to tremble and immediately clamped my hand over my mouth. She continued to say, Similar to a person who has had a stroke, the neurological event caused memory loss and other changes in me. I would see pictures of my children and not recognize them. She kept speaking and said, I've had to learn everything all over again. While that woman spoke, I was having my own personal earthquake. I held my hand to my mouth to keep from screaming, Shut up, don't stop talking. I was trembling and weeping uncontrollably. With every word she was saying, she was describing the life I had been living for the past few years. I thought I had done something to cause me to forget my children. I thought I had failed them somehow because I was so changed. I had never heard of anything like retrograde amnesia. I hadn't experienced a head trauma to cause my amnesiac event. I only knew that my memories were gone and my life had instantly been made new. After the woman had finished speaking and the meeting concluded, I went to her trembling, my face wet with tears. I thanked her for sharing her story. I was relieved that my experience had a name. In addition, I was liberated from the blame I had secretly carried against myself for forgetting my own children's lives. That evening, two of my friends followed me home and sat with me for several hours as I wept. We sat together on the couch, one on either side, one looking on the internet to discover the medical website that gave insight into retrograde amnesia and its description. The other held my shaking hand. From 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., they stayed with me, listening to my tearful confession and joyful relief that there was a name for the amnesia that wiped out my past like a sudden tsunami. Although I wouldn't be sure of what I knew, at least I knew the name to define some part of what had happened to me. Somewhere in the quiet days that followed that tumultuous night, Jesus whispered tenderly to me, Forget what you forgot. As a gentle sigh when some heavy weight is laid down, I sighed into Jesus' grace and relaxed into the forgetfulness he had orchestrated. I reminded myself that he knows me perfectly and loves me perfectly. As the dust settled and I stopped straining against the mist of the past, I began to challenge what I could learn. The test of my cognitive capacity became more important than trying to quantify what I could remember. Another important lesson during my self-discovery phase is to tell the truth. Firstly, I do not lie because I am a born-again believer in Jesus Christ. I also do not lie because I do not need to remember my truth. I always tell the truth because I don't always remember what I've talked about, whatever that was before. As long as I keep telling the truth, I don't have to remember what I said. The truth is always what I know, I think, I believe, I experienced. Since I got a new mind, I lost over 100 pounds of physical weight and incalculable emotional and spiritual baggage. I sometimes wondered and dared to hope that this change was permanent. I secretly hoped I was progressively improving. I knew I would meet some challenges that would prove my life is firmly and irrevocably anchored in Jesus forever. Gratefully, in all the years since that night, I have proof. After years of derogatory labels, confusion, and inner turmoil, my freedom arrived in a moment. My next challenge would be learning how to live in glorious, exciting, unpredictable freedom.